Rhein-Ruhr Osten is one of the shortest German routes in TSW, but it does have a somewhat unique vibe due to the narrow valley through which it runs. I used to like this route a few years back, but my opinion on it has since soured for a variety of reasons. As for the Vossloh G6, this is a cracking little locomotive, and she gave me a good first impression of the developer behind this add-on, Train Sim Germany. The RRO add-on itself, on the other hand, was made by Dovetail, and isn't as good as the G6. RRO was first released in October 2019, and the version compatible with TSW4 now costs $43.59 NZD at the normal price. Meanwhile, the G6 diesel costs an additional 29 New Zealand dollars. That is a notable increase from the original prices. It used to be $37 for the route itself and $24.79 for the G6. But apparently DTG did this because of the increased cost of living in the UK. This is not a large route at all. You only get 31 kilometres, or 19 miles of track from Wuppertal-Steinbeck to Hagen Hauptbahnhof, plus an additional 11 kilometres, or 7 miles, in the form of the S-bahn route via Gevelsberg. You could argue that this route is non-linear, but the only branch is just an alternative route between Schwelm and Hagen. As for what time period this route is set in, I don't know for certain, but I'm guessing it's sometime between 2017 and 2019. Dovetail's decision to cut the route coverage at Wuppertal-Steinbeck has never made sense to me. This is the first stop west of Wuppertal Hauptbahnhof, and it certainly isn't a major station. Indeed, only the local trains stop here. I reckon Dovetail should have continued the route coverage up to Essen Hauptbahnhof, or, at the very least, Wuppertal-Vorwinkel. This wasn't the first time we saw Hagen Hauptbahnhof and the nearby freight yard in TSW, because it already featured in the older Ruhr-Sieg Nord add-on. That pack was first released in October 2018, and it includes the 61km long route from Hagen to Finnentrop, but RSN and RRO are not merged into one big route for reasons I don't remember. It's the same situation with East Coastway and the Brighton Main Line, even though both routes feature Brighton Station. There's also an atrocious rendition of the iconic Wuppertal-Schwebebahn and their GTW15 trains, which you can see running close to the main line between Wuppertal-Oberbarmen and Wuppertal Hauptbahnhof, although the real line actually continues past Central Station, crosses a motorway, and runs above the street to its western terminus at Wuppertal-Vorwinkel. In real life, Wuppertal-Kluse station can be seen from mainline trains approaching Wuppertal Hauptbahnhof from the east. But, for some reason, Dovetail didn't bother modelling that station in-game. As far as I'm concerned, there's no excuse for this, given that they did manage to model a criminally basic rendition of Oberbarmen station at the eastern terminus. But it still looks atrocious, given the complete lack of detail on the platforms, and this ruins the immersion because it's clearly visible from the main line. And let's not forget the lack of even a basic rendition of a turning loop just past the platform. In real life, this system has a turning loop at both ends of the line because the real Schwebebahn trains only have a cab at one end. Yet, for whatever reason, we get this cursed and fictitious one-car bidirectional variant of the GTW15 in-game. And since Dovetail were able to do a semi-decent job modelling the iconic A-frame structure that carries the suspended monorail above the River Wupper, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't have included the entire 13.3 kilometre long line in a fully drivable state instead of leaving us with this half-assed AI-only abomination. On the motive power scene, this route only includes one locomotive and one multiple unit, specifically the MRCE BR185/5 and Deutsche Bahn BR422. The locomotive is part of the Bombardier Trax family, and runs freight services on RRO and other German TSW routes. Some might say she appears on too many routes. If my research is correct, 57 examples of the BR185/5 variant were built for MRCE and other leasing companies in the mid-2000s, but please correct me if I'm wrong. As for the BR422, 84 examples of this four-car design were built by a consortium of Alstom and Bombardier between 2008 and 2010. They are used exclusively on the S-bahn Rhein-Ruhr network, with the coaches featuring 3 sets of doors on each side for faster boarding and disembarking at stations. I don't know how accurate the BR422's sounds are. They've always seemed very mediocre to me, as someone who doesn't know too much about German EMUs. As for the BR185/5, I believe her sounds are identical to those used on the previous, and now overused, BR185/2, without a single notable change. Disappointingly, we don't get the green and white Verkehrsverbund Rhein-Ruhr livery for the BR422, only the stock standard Deutsche Bahn red livery. And although the BR1440 Corridor Continental units also run S-bahn services through Wuppertal in real life, this unit is nowhere to be seen in TSW. The Vossloh G6 is unique for a variety of reasons, not least because of her strange proportions. For starters, just look at the wheel spacing. This add-on was made by Trainsim Germany and originally released in December 2021, and from what I've seen, she has received mostly positive reviews from the community since then. If only one could say the same about Rivet Games' products, and yet they've been making TSW add-ons longer than any other third-party developer. So what the hell is going on? I believe this was only the third German diesel locomotive released for TSW, with the first two being the BR204 and BR363. Incidentally, the G6 is a very modern design compared to those other two, having first appeared in 2008. Over the next 9 years, 133 examples of this design were built. The G6 was intended to be a leaser unit, to use an American-esque term, and she is capable of running in France as well as her native Germany. The TSW version is painted in a green and grey livery, albeit with Deutsche Bahn instead of Vossloh branding. I suspect this was done to get around licensing issues. According to the product listing on Steam, where there is no mention of Vossloh, this variant is equipped with a Cummins QSK 23-L prime mover that produces 900 horsepower. Although the G6 is primarily a shunter, she has a top speed of 80 km per hour, meaning she is capable of running on the main line for short distances. This locomotive has a working cab light, but instead of the driver switching it off themselves, the light will switch itself off after 45 seconds. The driving experience is quite interesting, because the cab has two control stands, one for each direction of travel, and this setup reminds me of the British Rail Class 20. The G6's throttle is set up in largely the same way as the much older BR363, in that you've got hold, power increasing, and power decreasing positions. In other words, this is very different to the conventional notched throttle found on, for example, the BR628-2 diesel multiple unit. The Vossloh G6 may be a bit sluggish, especially when hauling a train, but I've always liked driving this thing. As I am no expert on the real thing, I can't verify whether or not the sounds and physics are accurate, but considering that this was made by a third-party developer instead of Dovetail, I'd like to think that the devs took some time to make sure that the sounds and physics were at least accurate. To make the driving experience even more interesting, you've also got the option of switching control stands as and when required. Timetable mode has 169 playable services for the BR422, only 13 for the BR185-5 and 19 for the G6. Motive power from other add-ons, such as s-bahn and Bremen to Oldenburg, will also layer onto RRO to help make the rail scene feel a little more lively, though not necessarily more realistic. The schedule for the BR422's passenger services is all over the place, but I'm mainly focusing on the S8 runs over to Hagen because the RB48 and S9 services are largely pointless. You can only drive the former between Wuppertal-Steinbeck and Wuppertal-Oberbarmen, and the latter for only 2 stops between Steinbeck and the Hauptbahnhof. I would have thought that the S8 service was supposed to run every 20 minutes, but the schedule in TSW is really inconsistent. Sometimes the trains will run 20 minutes apart, as they should, but other times you will be waiting between 40 and 80 minutes for the next train. Surely the frequency of the real S-bahn Rhein-Ruhr system is nowhere near this inconsistent. In terms of journey times, it normally only takes 40 minutes to complete the run from Wuppertal-Steinbeck to Hagen Hauptbahnhof, or vice versa, via that S-bahn diversion. A bit too short of a journey for my liking. When you load an S8 service with the BR422 at Wuppertal-Steinbeck, you don't get any time to set up the train, and are instead expected to start moving immediately after the service loads in. This is the same problem seen on the older Great Western Express DLC, which I reviewed at the end of October 2023. A frustrating issue with the BR422 is where the destination options are concerned, although the functional destination display is a decent feature. Despite the fact that we're on Rhein-Ruhr Osten, the lead unit always spawns as the Hauptstrecke Rhein-Ruhr version, regardless of which end of the route you're starting at, while the second unit is the correct RRO version. This is very annoying because the HRR version has the wrong destination options for RRO, and it looks very silly when the rear unit is the only one showing the correct destination. Meanwhile, if you've got s-bahn, you'll be able to use the BR146-2 locomotive and Doppelstockwagen coaches to run additional locomotive haul services going down the fast line via Wuppertal. These represent part of the RE4 service, which runs from Aachen to Dortmund in real life, although the real service mainly used BR111 locomotives, which we still don't have in TSW. The presence of the BR185-5 and Vossloh G6 is good because they allow for increased service variation, although, as I mentioned earlier, they have barely any playable services. Most of the time, you'll just be running the G6 on shunting turns in the Hagen area, but there's at least one or two services where you can take the little 060 over to Wuppertal via Wuppertal. As for the BR185/5, nearly all of her services are just full-length runs between Wuppertal and Hagen, either with container flatbeds or oil tankers, and these are very disappointing because they don't even take 30 minutes to complete. Two of the G6's services are impossible to complete, because it would appear Dovetail still haven't fixed an issue with dodgy signals in Hagen Yard. Sometimes you will get thrown out of the session because the game thinks and rigidly insists that you passed a red signal, even though it appears as green on the HUD. Besides the wildly inconsistent s-bahn schedule, another issue I have with timetable mode, and the route in general, is the unrealistic rail scene. There aren't any layers for the intercity express trains that we've got in the game, these being the BR401 ICE 1, BR403 ICE 3, and BR406 ICE 3M, despite the fact that ICE trains do run over the Wuppertal to Hagen section in real life. Another train that's missing from this route is the BR9442 Talent 2 in National Express colours. Despite the fact that these units were already running services between Wuppertal and Hagen by 2019, as part of the RE7 service from Rhein-Ruhr to Krefeld Hauptbahnhof. Instead, the existing BR143 and overused Doppelstockwagen coaches are used to represent RE7. As frustrating as the NEX Talent 2's absence is, I have a theory as to why that unit is not in TSW. It's those blasted licensing issues again! Come to think of it, I don't think any of Germany's private passenger operators are featured in the game. Not a single one. In other words, companies who are completely separate from Deutsche Bahn. So, despite the fact that it's in a non-standard livery, the BR1442 Talent 2 on the S-bahn Mitteldeutschland doesn't count. As boring as the driving experience on the BR422 can be, you at least have the frequent station stops to make it somewhat interesting. You don't have that luxury with the BR185/5 and her freight services. There is absolutely nothing special about this locomotive, partly because the driving experience is largely identical to that of the red BR185/2, the one which Dovetail really likes to reuse over and over again for multiple routes to the point of farce. Although this locomotive is reasonably powerful, and capable of reaching 160 km per hour, it can be difficult to handle the freight trains because of their sheer weight. Although, to be fair, it's not as hard as driving the American freight trains. Not helping the situation is the incredibly boring nature of the line via Wuppertal, the one used by freight and regional trains. Although you have to deal with gradients as steep as 1 in 38, this side of the route only has one station and very little in the way of interesting scenery. There were quite a few times where I even saw grass on the track. Something else I noticed when I was driving the BR185/5 was this bizarre tendency for her to lurch around questionably laid curves. From the cab view, it looked and felt as if this ruddy thing was going to derail, despite moving at or below the speed limit. I guess this is just a combination of TSW4's new suspension physics and the questionable track laying on Rhein-Ruhr Osten. If anything, it reminds me a lot of older Just Trains routes in TS Classic. There's not much I can say about the overall quality of the scenery. It's just as weak as nearly all other German routes in the game, in stark contrast to the Niedertalbahn, of course. But one crucial issue that I couldn't ignore was just round the corner west of Gevelsberg West station. For some reason, the catenary masts, just like Duncan's Korea, are now on the line. This was never an issue prior to TSW4, and I have no idea how it could have ever happened in the first place. But I can't say I'm surprised that Dovetail haven't bothered fixing this major problem yet. There was also this one especially bad area on the regional/freight line. Around halfway between Hagen and Wuppertal, there's this huge field right next to the track that lacks proper grass details. And I'm really getting sick of seeing this issue appearing so many times, especially on the more recent routes like S-bahn Vorarlberg. So in conclusion, Rhein-Ruhr Osten is a route with a decent concept, but very bad execution. The route is ruined by its short length. It should have been extended to Essen, as well as the poor quality scenery and lack of decent motive power variation, even with main Spetautbahn and Ruhrsieg Nord installed. As far as I'm concerned, the only saving grace in the whole ordeal is the Vossloh G6. I used to like running the BR422 from Wuppertal to Hagen and vice versa, but the unreasonably short route, inconsistent headways for timetable mode services, and the tight timetable have spoiled the experience. Needless to say, I do not recommend trying this route out for yourself.